Nigel Farage has said there's no way back for Rupert Lowe.
Today, I believe, yes.
That was the phrase, which sounds pretty definitive.
Well,
so where does Rupert Lowe go?
I mean, he's talked, and there's the Tories been talking to him. Do you really think the Tories going to take him on with what he's been saying?
Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. Today we are doing a deep dive into the internal politics of Reform UK. For those of you joining from overseas or who may not be familiar, this is the right-wing party here in the UK. It's equivalent to some of those parties on continental Europe that are achieving a lot of success. And suddenly, even though it's a small party, it only has 5 or perhaps 4 MPs, it gets a lot of attention because it has a huge amount of influence. It is the competition between Reform and the Tory party that is driving a lot of the political conversation. It's scoring as much as 25% in the polls, and frankly, it needs to be taken seriously. You could say it is the only political party that seems to have a lot of positive momentum right now, until this week, where suddenly 2 of the leading figures in Reform seem to go to war with each other. Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, and Rupert Lowe, one of the other MPs, who has been getting a lot of attention himself from over on the other side of the Atlantic. Elon Musk has been tweeting favourably about him, and suddenly they've fallen out. Rupert Lowe has lost the whip, has been ejected for now from the party, and everyone is trying to work out what is going on. Well, it's hard to find someone who actually understands the internal workings of Reform UK. We were going to talk to Zia Yusuf, who is the chairman, but it turns out he's maybe involved in this drama, so he may not give us a clear and unvarnished version of the truth. So we have found for you today Gawain Towler. So Gawain was formerly the head of press, the spokesman for Reform UK, worked unbelievably closely with Nigel Farage, first on the Brexit Party more than 5 years ago, and throughout the recent success, he stepped down, or you will tell us, Gawain, whether
was fired, yes.
There we go. You said it, not me. You left.
It's true.
You were fired, but you remain in close contact with them.
Yeah.
Because of your position on the outside, we're hoping you can give us the real, unvarnished truth.
As honest as I possibly can.
Welcome to UnHerd.
Thank you.
Let's start, before we get into this recent fracas, with exactly what your role is, just so everyone listening and watching knows. So you know the Reform UK party about as well as anyone in the world, perhaps?
Yeah, I would think. That's probably... Well, of the last 6 months, I've not... Well, 5 months, I've not been inside, but I'm definitely onside.
Right.
In the sense that I am a Reform supporter, I'm a Reform member, I have compared a couple of their conferences, I speak at branches, and so I am definitely part of the broader tent, if not in the small... Right. In the VIP, I'm not in the VIP lounge.
You don't especially have an axe to grind in the recent...
No, obviously I've worked with Nigel since 2004 in various iterations, on and off. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time I've been fired, so these things happen. Okay,
so let's dive straight into the timeline of what's been happening in the last week or so. So Wednesday, the 5th of March, very recently, the Daily Mail publishes an interview with Rupert Lowe. In this interview, Rupert calls Nigel Farage and his style messianic, and that in its current form, Reform is still a protest party. Nigel Farage, the leader, then responds the next day on Talk TV, and he says Rupert Lowe is utterly and completely wrong. Quote, perhaps he wants to be Prime Minister, most people in politics do. A couple of days later, the chairman, Zia Yusuf, and the chief whip, Lee Anderson, release a statement against Rupert Lowe, alleging workplace bullying in Mr. Lowe's parliamentary and constituency offices, and even the threat of physical violence against Zia Yusuf. There's a Twitter war, there are opinion editorials and articles in newspapers, there's a lot of kind of social media blame game. What's the truth, as you know?
Right. The timeline is still a bit murky. There were a couple of members of staff, I believe, were fired. Female members of staff, one in Great Yarmouth, one in the parliamentary office, for gross misconduct. They then claimed bullying as their response to the firing, and because they are parliamentary employees, not party employees, the HR process is a parliamentary process. It's done through IPSA and so on and so forth. Now, at some point, these complaints, the counter-complaints, made their way to the party.
Okay, so just to be clear, you think that these people were fired first,
Yes.
And complained afterwards.
Correct. Or during that process, there was an HR process about the firing, which is normal.
And those complaints were directed at Rupert Lowe, MP.
His office.
At his office. Something to do with workplace bullying.
Something to do with workplace bullying. Now, Rupert claims that these claims are vexatious, but there was an HR process. It's parliamentary staff.
And this is last year sometime?
This is a few weeks ago. Those counter-complaints, I believe, then made their way to the party. And the chairman of the party is a stickler for if a complaint hits the party, it has to be taken very, very seriously.
This is Zia Yusuf,
yeah.
So we should just put him in context. He's quite a key person in all of this.
Absolutely vital to the operations of the party.
So he's the chairman of the party, he's a successful businessman. He is controversial within the party in some ways because he is leading...
Becoming so, but he's trying to change... There's
he was given a job. Professionalisation.
He was given a job by Nigel, make the party general election ready 2029. Mm-hmm. Go. It's your train set. Do what you need to do. I was one of the first people to be fired in that process.
You left the train.
I was disembarked. That was part of that process. Fine, these things happen. Nobody has a job for life. But he is a stickler. If a complaint comes in, it has to be absolutely handled properly.
So, as far as you know, this was all happening some time ago.
Yeah, a while back.
And yet they surfaced publicly in the days after this spat between Rupert.
What happened is, I believe, that the party hired an independent QC to look at these complaints. Mr. Lowe had been going through the formal process of the Parliament, took umbrage at the fact that these people weren't party staff. It's being handled by internal HR in Parliament. What on earth has the party got to do with this? Now, Mr. Lowe is a proud man and didn't take kindly to a second investigation into the same things taking place. Now, the party claimed in the press release that he hadn't worked with the inquiry. But his attitude is, I've already worked with the inquiry once. And so he, as a proud man, got annoyed and refused to engage at that point.
Let's just read some extracts from that statement. So this came from the chairman, Zia Yusuf, and Lee Anderson. So this is prior to him being pretty much expelled from the party. Evidence was provided to us of workplace bullying, the targeting of female staff who raised concerns, and evidence of derogatory and discriminatory remarks made about women, including reference to a perceived disability. Okay, so that's what happened. In addition to these allegations of a disturbing pattern of behaviour, Mr. Lowe has, on at least 2 occasions, made threats of physical violence against our party chairman. So there's a new sort of layer to the accusation here, which accordingly this matter is with the police. So apparently it would appear Zia Yusuf has actually referred this to the police.
So I understand, yes, and the police have confirmed that.
Do you know anything about that group of allegations?
This baffles me. I don't know what's going on there. I really don't. That is beyond me. I know a little bit about the other one, but the point is its timeline. So first investigation, second investigation. Understandably, and I can understand why somebody might feel, hold on, it's nothing to do with you. These aren't party staff. If they were party staff, fine, but they're not. They're being done, it's done some separately. So there was a bit of a contretemps about that. Now, there's a disagreement that I've seen in the last 2 days about when Mr. Lowe spoke to Andrew Pearce, the Mail, because if it came out on the 5th, he was significantly before that the interview was done. Mm-hmm. Was it a question of him getting his retaliation in first? Or was it post? And the timeline is confused. I don't know. But whatever. He wrote that, or gave that interview, which was less than obliging about the party structure and about how the party was moving forward. And Nigel took umbrage to that, and I think understandably. The questions that Mr. Lowe raised, I thought, honestly, were wrong in the sense that you need a manifesto, you need a platform of policies. Of course you do, to go into a general election, but you don't necessarily release them 4 years in advance. You build, these things build, they don't pop out fully formed. They are a work in progress. And Rupert was demanding that there should be this full platform now. Well, we don't actually need it. And we would be stupid to try and invent policies on the hoof. And sometimes Rupert has a tendency to make statements as if he is making policy on the hoof on his Twitter feed and things of this sort.
So what's interesting is to look at the reaction in the past few days.
Yeah.
We have some new information. YouGov has done a new poll. They measure Nigel Farage's personal favourability among Reform UK voters.
Yeah.
So this is the key
Specific group.
demographic. And it does appear to have plunged somewhat in the last week or two. He's down from in the 90s among Reform voters to 73% favourable, and unfavourables up to about a quarter of Reform voters. So there's evidently a chunk of his supporters who are, as it were, Team Rupert versus Team Nigel.
Yes, but no, but. I think there's a conflation here. If you look at the polling in the round, the drop seems to be more associated with, and if you look at the support for Zelensky, the massive hit, an attack on Farage suggesting he was a fan of Putin, which he isn't. But there's been a lot of media about that. And you've had Priti Patel saying he's like a Corbyn. You've had Starmer attacking him very publicly saying that. You've got a lot of that. So it is hard to tell whether these numbers are one thing or another. And the change started before the Stramash. So I would suggest it's probably more the former, which is the Putin stuff, than it is because if you look at those polls, again, only 50% of Reform supporters have heard of Mr. Lowe. So for him to lose half of those who've heard of Mr. Lowe, I think is probably pushing it. I really do. I think that is wishful thinking on some people's part.
What I think our audience needs to try to understand better is what these two characters represent, because in a sense the personality clash is only so interesting, although it is kind of interesting because it suggests that the professionalisation has a way to go.
But it is always the case when you get people who are successful entrepreneurs in their own right, and Nigel is possibly the country's greatest political entrepreneur of recent decades or more, compared to Rupert being a business entrepreneur and very successful. Both. And of course, Zia as himself, and Richard Tice. These are many of the big figures in Reform are self-made people who've got out and done well and been successful, and expect if they click their fingers, things happen, because that's how it works. And so it's very much to learn to become a team player. Tice, for example, 2019 Brexit Party days, he was very much the click my fingers and things should happen. And when it didn't, he got very upset. But over the period of time when he took over the party leadership, he learns that politics doesn't work like that. And he was very prickly at first, but he has built an enormous loyal following because he learned the difference between business and politics.
So partly what you're saying is definitely there's an element of that, which is these more entrepreneurial parties, and the same is definitely true in Germany and across Europe and around the world.
But think of the success of Archie Norman.
Right.
Massively successful businessman, didn't really cut it in party politics.
There's a certain discipline required.
And the teamwork side, when you're not the boss. You're used to being the boss and you're no longer the boss. It's not easy.
It's to do with the newness of the party. Is it also to do with the right-leaning politics?
Well, yes, it is that entrepreneurial, get the government out of our hair, let us get on, let us finish the job, let us do this sort of thing, let people free them up from regulation, from taxation, just let them be. And there's a lot of that in Reform.
Also a kind of, I'm damned if I'm not going to say what I think kind of mood.
The freedom of speech stuff is quite important. Yes.
It's the opposite of politically correct. So they will choose to kind of, they're not going to hide
what they believe if they're asked a question.
Yeah, which makes for quite tricky politics when
and entertainment for the masses.
Trying to form a party.
But no, it does, of course. But part of the reason we're on 27%, we're leading in some polls. Even now, today, we're first equal with Labour in one of the big polls that came out today. Despite all this, what you point out here, we're still challenging at the very top. Is because a vast proportion of this country is fed up with people sitting there and not telling the truth and hiding what they think and pretending things are different than they are. And so therefore it is a refreshing thing. This is why people support Reform, because they like the straight talking, they like the forthrightness.
Do they like the infighting?
I'm pretty sure they don't like the infighting, but it is part and parcel of the same thing. It's one side of the other side of that coin. There's going to be clashes. But when you go back to what you asked,
because that I think is where it becomes more broadly important. That I think the point you make is definitely true. That big personalities, new parties, lack of discipline, all of that. But there is also a kind of ideological split, isn't there? And I think we want to try to understand that.
The ideological split is, I think is not as broad, and I think whilst the individual characters who are representing the two sides of that gulf may not be able to build a bridge, I don't think it's impossible to build a bridge over the gulf.
Let's just describe what that gulf is. So there's, as it were, a more moderate slash cautious.
Not we're talking about immigration.
Not wanting
about
to
immigration.
appear. Well, tell us, what is the disagreement?
The big thing is the immigration dispute. How do you deal with the situation we're in? None of us are happy with it. Rupert has gone down a line that is mass deportations now.
That's his position.
Yep.
And he wants mass deportations of criminals?
No, illegal migrants.
Of anyone found in the country
who shouldn't be here.
Who shouldn't be here.
Who have not got the permission.
But what if they're in the process?
If they've arrived illegally, the idea is Rupert would like to see those who are illegal removed because they shouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. And in fact, arriving illegally should be a bar for you getting permanent leave to remain,
right,
or whatever.
So he wants to see mass deportations, which puts him on the kind of right wing of the Reform Party.
Yes, and he has a lot of the very voluble support on the internet are not Reform members, but should we say Reform adjacent, a little bit beyond the confines of our big tent.
This is where you veer into the Tommy Robinson,
for example. Yeah.
Because there's an overlap there. I mean, I think Rupert Lowe is careful not to explicitly endorse Tommy Robinson, but he's more sympathetic.
Much more. Nigel has criticised the treatment of Robinson in prison, but he doesn't criticise that Robinson is in prison.
And Nigel Farage is very clear that Tommy Robinson would never be welcome in the Reform tent. And that has already his remarks there. I think it was on the Winston Marshall show, where he was very clear that he's not, this is Nigel Farage I'm talking about, not in favour of so-called remigration. He wants to be welcoming of Muslims. He obviously appointed Zia Yusuf, who is a Muslim, as the party chair. He said there are a great number of them in the UK. He eventually wants to even attract some of their votes. He was much softer and more pragmatic, and the alienation seemed to begin already back then, and it seems to have come to a head now.
It started with the Steve Edgerton interview. Nigel, we've discovered yesterday, or the day before yesterday, 104,000 people of foreign nationality have committed crimes in the last 3 years. Every single one of them, Nigel would say, should go. Gone. You're here, you committed a crime, go. Stop the boats, absolutely. Nobody arriving from this day forward ever gets leave to remain if they come in illegally. Here, Rupert and Nigel sing on the same song sheet. But Rupert, much of his Twitter following is, and his X following and his social media following, much of it is not from this country because it's pumped by Musk, is much more gung-ho about remigration, about deportation than Nigel. Nigel looks at the situation and goes, How? How are you going to unpick 1 million people? Now, it might be ideal, but how? How could you do that?
So, just to understand, within Reform, Zia Yusuf, who is the party chair, would be very much on Nigel's side of that, the more moderate side, let's say, closer to the Conservatives.
More moderate for the centre-right, an anathema to the Uni Party, who aren't prepared to do anything.
Who else is on that side?
Everybody, pretty much.
Of the MPs?
I think so, yes. If you look at the Contract for the People, we're absolutely explicit on things of this sort about the deportation of people who've committed crimes. Nationals, joint nationals, commit crimes, go. There isn't a big split there. Mm-hmm. But what's happened is this, there's been a lot of, as I say, not Reform people who have been making these demands and have been saying, and have been, and I fear, much as I like Rupert, I fear his head has been slightly turned by the adulation of a certain sector of the population.
Well, let's just explain what happened there, because Elon Musk was supposedly great friends with Nigel Farage, or at least they met. They said nice things to each other. They said nice
things about him, but
and
they
then,
met
to everyone's surprise, a couple of months ago, Musk suddenly said, actually, Farage is not up to it.
And why did he say that?
He said it because Farage had made disparaging remarks about Tommy Robinson.
He did not believe that Tommy Robinson was a political prisoner.
Right.
That's why. Nigel's not going to curry favour with somebody to say something on the wild off chance and the suggestion at the time was Musk was going to give the party money. No, Nigel's going to say what he believes, whether money's in it or not.
So Rupert Lowe at that point, having been quite an obscure figure, not with much public kind of profile, was selected by Musk as a potential alternative. And he followed him, he started retweeting him and saying he thinks Rupert Lowe is very interesting.
Rupert had a support base in the UK before then because he is more forthright on these issues. But I think Danny Finkelstein wrote a piece in the Times today where he talks about Nigel is a broader, Rupert is a deeper.
In terms of his support.
And also what he wants the party to do. Reform won 4.1 million votes at the last election. To win a general election, you need 10 plus. And if you're sitting on a sofa, there's maybe a couple of 100,000 votes down the right-hand side if you're looking down to find the coins. But in the middle, that's where you find the 6 million. If we want to win and change Britain for the better, we've got to be looking behind those cushions there, because that gets you nowhere. And you will turn off a lot of people who you need to attract.
And that is definitely Nigel Farage's view.
Farage wants to win. Rupert wants to be pure. And I made some comment the other day in an article where I feel Rupert has become almost like a Corbynista. Make the perfect the enemy of the good. And so that left wing, we've got to be pure blood socialists. And of course, that's not going to win you a general election.
So you think he's more ideological?
On this issue, yes.
More purist?
More purist. And that's great, but not if you want to win an election. That's the bottom line. And what are you in politics for? To change the world. Now, Farage has succeeded in changing the world in this country by forcing a referendum. He didn't win it on his own, but without him, it wouldn't have happened at all. So, and he has a track record. He also is a past master of political timing. When you might believe something, you might know something to be true. But if the country isn't going to wear it, there's no point in climbing up that hill and dying on a hill that the country is not prepared to listen to.
So Nigel Farage's point of view then is, having been a veteran of the UK political scene, he has an intuitive sense of what would be a winnable kind of position. And
more so than others, perhaps.
The right-hand flank of his support base is urging him always to go more and more and further and make more and more stronger comments about how illegal immigrants and so on would be treated. His instinct is to say, no, we're not doing that. We're going to stay a little bit more centrist.
To be fair, some of the Twitter followers of Rupert are not just saying illegal immigrants. They want remigration of foreigners, of legal migrants too.
How widespread is that?
They make a lot of noise on the internet. I'm not entirely sure how widespread that is. I really am not. I don't think it is particularly widespread. I am sure that after this interview, I will get death threats. I did last time I said something like this, from the right, because I do not, I'm a race traitor. There are those people out there. Whereas as I say, illegals, yes, particularly those, first you start with those who committed crimes and then you deal with it, you stop the boats, you turn off the taps to allow the water to cool. Yeah, I'll get grief.
And have they always been around? I mean, you've been there for a number of years. Do you feel like the atmosphere with Musk
there have been times,
has made that more intense?
It's become a little bit more intense, but it's always been there. It's always been there if you go to the public meetings.
But has there been a change in the past year, let's say, on places like Twitter, where to make those more kind of overt statements about sending foreigners home, etc.?
It has become more voluble, but I think that's because the situation on the ground in this country is changing. When you allow 1 million people in legally in a year, that changes society. And so people in society notice and get more angry. So yes, there are changes. But whether it's because of Elon Musk, I don't think so. I think it's because of what people feel and what they see. Things are changing, and a lot of people, myself included, are not wildly chuffed with the changes that are taking place.
But that group, which is obviously powerful and has a lot of energy, even if they may not...
They're not as that numerous yet, but they are loud. I don't think they're powerful. Powerful suggests they have the capacity to change things. They don't.
Another name in that circle would be Ben Habib, potentially. Yep. This is someone who, again, was a senior figure in the Reform Party, also got sidelined, eventually ejected.
I think he recused himself in the end.
He recused himself. he fell out on similar kinds of grounds, that he was a bit more hardline and he thought Nigel was soft.
There were a number of reasons why Ben and Nigel did not see eye to eye. Actually, this wasn't one of them. There were other things. This has become one since, and Ben has been charging around the TV studios, enjoying this Stramash like nobody's business, and writing articles and all the rest of it. A year ago now, I was working on Ben's by-election campaign when he was fighting the Wellingborough by-election. I like Ben a lot. I've worked very closely with him. And when I was fired, Ben offered me a job within 2 days. But I had to turn it down because I knew he'd want me to work on attacking the party and attacking Nigel, so that wasn't what I was up for. But he's a decent bloke. He is a decent bloke and well-liked, and worked his socks off for the party, travelled all over the country. Anybody who said, come and speak at an event, he'd be there. He wouldn't charge expenses. He really made an effort. But he also did things that were... he wanted to concentrate... he's become, and he is right on the Northern Ireland issue, but... And for a party, Nigel had worked very hard with the DUP for many years, was good friends with them, and Ben set up a deal with the TUV, and that broke an old relationship that was pre-existing. So that was annoying. So there were other reasons for the Ben thing. It wasn't this migration issue, though Ben is on the more...
He's talking about it.
Yeah, the Ben is now much more voluble about it.
So let's just have a couple of quotes from Ben Habib here. So first of all, he's very, very strong about Farage, his erstwhile colleague and friend. He says, Farage's modus operandi is to damage anyone who might challenge him in any way whatsoever. In Rupert Lowe's case, he has tried to destroy him. Farage is a deeply flawed individual. He has no political ideology, just a desire to be in the limelight, make money and remove anyone other than sycophants. Rupert and I only care about saving the country.
Yeah.
That's just sour grapes, is it?
Read it again. Rupert and I only care about saving the country. And that nasty man Farage, who spent 30 years working his socks off to save the country. When I first knew Nigel, his house was double remortgaged. He was driving around the country in a broken down, rusty Volvo estate, because that's all he could afford, kept together with, keep the pound stickers all around the holes. The idea that he's just in it for himself, absolutely not. At those days, he had no idea he'd get to the point he has now. He had no idea he'd have a TV show. He broke his back and his bank to try and get this country free. So this is, I'm sorry, it's as if there's all this recency bias. I know Nigel from the last 3 weeks, and that's the only truth exists. Yeah, Nigel's become a success, done well in TV. He has. He did I'm a Celebrity. He's done extremely well. One of the reasons he was considering not coming back into politics, because of this sort of rubbish, of this sort of games. He doesn't enjoy them. But he also knows he's probably the only figure in the country who has a chance of smashing the consensus politics of the last 30 years. And therefore, he has a duty to do it.
How does this play out, do you think? We've got these two flanks. There is a lot of energy trying to push ever rightward on some of these issues.
It's happened before.
You've now you've got a resistance from Nigel Farage and his chairman, Zia Yusuf. What do you think happens next? Do you think there could be a split-off party? I mean, that has been talked about. Ben Habib
Ben's talking about it.
Is saying that he's in regular, or I think constant contact with Rupert Lowe. Could we see a kind of reform?
Yes, I'm sure that went down well with Nigel.
But do you think that could happen?
Good luck. Do you know how hard it is to start a political party? Almost impossible. How many successful political parties have been created in the last 50 years? How many?
Very few.
SDP? Not really. It wasn't that successful. UKIP, well, it did well, it served its purpose and then disappeared into that right-wing thing, and people like Nigel and myself left because we didn't want to go down that route. Brexit Party, it existed for a purpose, it succeeded in its purpose, won the European elections, hands down, stood back because that famous phrase that many politicians use but nobody actually does, country before party, Farage, and sadly, and there was a lot of people very upset by it, but he put his country before his party. What I mean is, if you want to start a political party, crack on. Do you remember Lawrence Fox? He set up a political party, had a huge amount of money, had big donors. What happened? It's really, really hard to set up a political party. And I've been there through the creation of 2 of them, and virtually the creation of the 3rd, that Nigel's been created, really. Though I give Richard Tice his due, the fact that he took the party from 3% to 14% without Farage being the main blunderbuss was a phenomenal piece of work over 3 years. And this is why the old reform base loved Richard so well.
So Nigel Farage has said there's no way back for Rupert Lowe.
Today, I believe, yes.
That was the phrase, which sounds pretty definitive.
Well,
so where does Rupert Lowe go?
I mean, he's talked, and there's the Tories been talking to him. Do you really think the Tories are going to take him on with what he's been saying? If he's on the right edge of reform, do you really think he's going to go there? Well, they can have him, I suppose, if he wants to join, and they're happy to have him. Or maybe there's this Ben Habib, Rupert Lowe, new political party. But do you really think, and Andrew Bridgen's been nice about him as well, do you really think that they are going to be able to set up a political party? Do you really think that Rupert Lowe, as an independent or in this other political party, is going to win Great Yarmouth? It's not going to happen. Bridgen went independent, fighting in his own seat, came 6th, I think, in his own constituency. I don't think these people have the first idea how hard it is to create a political party.
And do you think Nigel Farage's judgment is right then, that basically policies that start talking about re-migration, mass deportations, even if they were deportations of people not here legally, would somehow just be unpalatable to a centrist British voter, and that fundamentally we are kind of a moderate country?
I would think we're fundamentally right of centre, but gently so. We're Church of England, basically. We are a Church of England country, even if you aren't a member of the Church of England. There are Church of England Sikhs out there. There are Church of England Muslims, the sort of people that Nigel wants to appeal to. But in the same way that if we'd been banging on about the climate change idiocy as we see it, 10 years ago would have been laughed out of court. We can talk about it now, because in 4 years' time, with the increased bills and the jobs being sent abroad and so on and so forth, then that is an argument whose time has come. The timing thing that Farage is so good at, that is an argument whose time has come. People are getting increasingly upset about the vast numbers who've arrived here legally and illegally. The fact that there have been more undocumented men of fighting age who arrived in boats over the channel than there are in the armed forces is frankly disturbing, particularly when you get people turning up who waved Kalashnikovs in the air and say they want to slit the throats of all Jews. This is extremely concerning. This is what's turning up on our beaches. So yes, more and more people in this country are finding their traditional gentleness when it comes to these matters challenged by reality.
There was a recent video which Rupert Lowe actually retweeted. It was a kind of montage.
Well, this is why Nigel said it's gone too far.
Montage video about us versus them, where them is obviously the immigrant community. It was a lot of patriotic images of Britain and stirring music and the like. And I wonder whether that would appeal or not.
Actually, I haven't seen that one, so
Okay.
I'm not sure. I was thinking about it was when he basically accused Nigel of trying to stop him speaking about the grooming gangs, which is complete rubbish. But I don't think British justice, and the justice that I hold dear, though the one that the Sentencing Council seems to be overthrowing, the idea of equality before the law, yes, somebody who's in the grooming gang should be deported. But their family member who didn't report them to the police, Rupert was saying that they should be deported too. I think that goes against all concepts of British justice, and I would think Nigel would agree. One's annoyed with them, one wishes they had, one wishes they'd done something about it, but if you walk down the street and see somebody hit somebody in the face and you don't report them to police, you shouldn't be a criminal. The person who thumped them should be. And that is British justice. And now on the continent, you have a duty of care, a legal duty of care. Not here, and that's not who we are.
Do you think at the heart of some of this rhetoric that now Rupert Lowe is kind of getting interested in, because it seems to be popular with his online fan base, is an ethnic question? Because they don't quite spell it out, but there is a lot of sense of real Britain.
I don't think explicitly, no.
Not explicitly, no. But my question is it implicit on that wing of the party?
I have never considered it so. I've never felt it so. And it's not something that we've ever welcomed, and it's not something, and we've deliberately excluded. I mean, part of the reasons we have such a hardcore vetting system now is because 2% of our candidates at the general election were seen to have said things like that, and we kicked them out. We don't want that. And we've done this, and parties led by Farage over the years, we've regularly had people like that take part, we find out, we kick them out, because we don't want that.
What is the taboo that he doesn't want to say, or what is the line that he doesn't want to cross? Is it this idea that there is white ethnic Britain, and that is somehow what they want to return to through remigrating anyone who looks different? I think
some of these people online, absolutely that's true. And they have been vocal in their support for Rupert because they see him closer to their position than Farage is. But I don't think Rupert is at their position, though he has stated publicly that there's nothing wrong with being white. Well, there isn't. That sort of thing is not, it's left unsaid. Of course there's nothing wrong with being right, but you never say it because that's sort of soi-disant and beneath the salt, and it's just rude, isn't it? Any other ethnicity, any other culture, you can be as proud as you want, but that one, oh no, you don't talk about that.
What about the slightly softer version of what I've just said, which specifically is about the Muslim community? And this idea you do hear a lot, which is that somehow fundamentally, because of their faith, they cannot integrate properly into Christian liberal United Kingdom, try as they might, and therefore they shouldn't be welcomed at all. I mean, that is saying out loud what a lot of people within the Reform tent, I think, would agree with, isn't it?
Again, not something I've heard in the Reform tent, but I've certainly heard nearby. The people most under threat from radical Islam are not the white culture or the white people of this country. It's the moderate Muslims who wish to be part of this country. They're the ones they're the ones under the greatest threat. They're the ones who are silenced. They're the ones who have the hardest time. And in fact, we should be looking after them and protecting them.
That's, if you don't mind me saying, that is quite a clever, you're a comms professional here. It's also true. It's a clever response. But
it's also true. I have not heard Islamophobia in that ripe sense that you're talking about.
I don't think it was that. The question is...
That Muslims cannot become Western liberals. That's what you basically said, isn't it?
That is the position that I see a lot online from some people who would be in these groups. And, and there are versions of it.
As I say, I have not seen that within the inner workings of the party. I'm on a lot of local WhatsApp groups because I was the press officer, and so therefore all over the country I've got little wags of members, branch groups and things of this sort. I've not seen it there. And if I did see it there, I would call it out and kick it out.
So you think the mainstream of Reform members would be welcoming to Muslim immigrants?
Yes, if the Muslim immigrants were prepared to abide by our laws and pay all their taxes and play with a straight bat. Absolutely.
That's if they've already immigrated, presumably. They're not especially keen on additional Muslim immigrants.
We're not keen on any additional immigrants right now. Small numbers of highly qualified, but other than that, frankly, no. The housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, the fact, as we know from OBR numbers, that each migrant currently, on average, costs hundreds of thousands of pounds over a lifetime. This is not good for the country. It is reducing our standard of living. It is reducing GDP per capita. So, no, and it's not Islam. It's just the sheer numbers of people. The people from the Congo aren't Muslim who are turning up in large numbers. Yes, currently there's a lot of people from the Islamic world coming over, and particularly on the boats and things of this sort. That's true. But it's not just them. I mean, there was the classic case in point where a nurse, we need nurses, a nurse came from Zimbabwe. This is not a Muslim country. She brought 10 dependents with her, none of whom were working, all of whom cost. This is not an Islam thing. This is we have to stop what's going on because it is changing our country out of recognition and making ordinary people poorer.
Do you think the moderate wing of Reform, let's say the Nigel Farage wing, would be happy at least to have cultural criteria applied to future immigrants, so that you would say that cultures that integrate more easily, perhaps Christian cultures, should be prioritised over cultures that assimilate with greater difficulty?
I would think, and though I've not had this discussion, I don't know, but I would think, if we're seeing what's happening in Syria right now with the Christian community, I think that I wouldn't be at all surprised if the moderate wing of the party felt that those Christians who are being persecuted in Western Syria right now and being massacred by the new so-called peaceful non-Islamist government, if we could help them and provide refuge to them, then there would be a strong, and they're Syrians, there would be a strong support for that. The left will say, no, all refugees are the same. And we'd say, well, no, actually not all refugees are the same. Internal Christian refugees in Syria from the ISIS area were being treated appallingly in Islamic State-run refugee centres. So no, there's a difference in how they're treated. And so therefore, yes, I think there would be some support for that. Now, I can't speak for Nigel, I can't speak for Zia, but I would think that they would feel that way.
Big picture, let's just zoom out as we conclude here. The election is in, let's say, 4.5 years' time. A lot could happen, obviously.
Many slips between cup and lip.
But what we see here in the UK with what's going on with the Reform Party, in a way is mirrored in obviously different ways across European countries and in the United States. There are parallels, there are differences in each case. But the central question remains, which is, will those parties of the right wing sort of mature into parties that most voters could get behind, or will they splinter into ever more extreme and diverse factions? And I guess my question to you is, what do you think will happen here?
I think that what will happen is this is an awkward couple of weeks. I think there's a decent chance that in the UK's case, and then Reform's case, I think there's a very good chance that come the council elections, we will do very well, despite all this trouble. I think that if we can nick against the wind Runcorn, which is not out of the question, then suddenly all this fuss is completely forgotten and the momentum continues.
And Mr. Lowe just passes into oblivion.
That passes. Yeah, without a party, he will still be an MP, he will still have a platform, but I mean, how much have we heard from the independent Muslim MPs? Not a lot. So he'll be there, he'll still have his Twitter following, he'll still be able to sing to his adoring crowds, yes, but I suspect the train moves on and he'll find himself on a siding without that many people with him.
And what of Mr. Yusuf? Because you've been quite quiet about him, but his professionalisation drive was part of the reason you lost your job.
Yeah, I know, but as I said earlier, nobody has a job for life.
What do you think will happen to Mr. Yusuf?
I think that in part depends on how well we do and whether the momentum continues.
So if results in May are disappointing.
Don't you think it's extraordinary? We've had this great row and Rupert said what he did at a time when the membership's gone through the roof, we've doubled our polling, we're winning council by-elections. Now's the time to say, you know what, the boss is rubbish. Seems a funny time to do it, don't you think? It just seems that I understand why a lot of Tory MPs are considering writing letters when November comes up about Kemi, because she's not doing a good job. But to launch an attack on the boss when all the matrices are going in the right direction does seem quixotic at best.
But do you think Nigel could attempt to make peace with the right wing of his party by sacrificing Zia Yusuf and saying, OK, his professionalisation drive was going too far?
Not if we do well in the council elections, not if all the matrices continue. Why would he? Now, in other circumstances, then it would be a different question. Nigel has had chairman in the past. He has removed chairman in the past. Nobody has a job for life in politics.
So potentially, if it doesn't go so well in May, what you're saying is Zia Yusuf might be changed out.
What Zia has done is overseen the vast expansion of the machine, the fact that we have 400 plus branches, which we didn't have on the 4th of July. We now have professional staff working in all the regions, which we didn't. We had 3 or 4 people who were in the regions prior to that. We have a proper vetting team, we have merchandising, we have an events team, there's all sorts of stuff going on, there's policy work going on. All this is going on under Zia's watch. No man is perfect. Nigel certainly isn't perfect. I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, Rupert's not perfect, Zia's not perfect. Nobody is. And they all have their weaknesses. And the question is can the team be built and given the confidence and the trust to continue making those improvements? And I think that there is there needs possibly to be greater trust in the people who've been employed. There's some really, really, really good people there, really impressive.
Final question for you. Is it in any way to Nigel Farage's advantage to have a visible competitor to the right. Whether it's a new party with Lowe and Ben Habib or whether it's simply Tommy Robinson and his group, do you think it helps Farage and Reform UK to say, look, we're not the really right-wing ones. We're kind of centre-right.
Historically, yes. When the Brexit Party was founded, as opposed to trying to redo the UKIP, the Brexit Party was founded and we could, and the people who weren't happy with that more broader based, the famous political coalition as all parties are, it did no harm.
So in a way,
perfection in politics is defeat.
But so Rupert Lowe could, ironically, be doing Nigel Farage a favour here.
Long term, possibly. Yeah, it's entirely possible. We'll find out when it happens. But so
the day to look out for is the local elections in May.
I think that's going to be important. Of course, it's going to be important. This year, local elections in May. The by-election in Runcorn is going to be very important.
Yeah.
Then Wales and Scotland next year. That was always to me, that was always my big target. Before Nigel re-engaged with the party on the front line, I was looking at thinking, I thought, well, we could get 4.5 million votes, but probably no seats. But next year, we'll win seats in Cardiff and Edinburgh.
Well, we'll get you back after the local elections and we'll see how
see
you
what
do.
happens, yeah.
Gawain Towler, thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much, Freddie.
That was Gawain Towler, formerly the spokesman for the Reform UK party. He was shoved out as part of the professionalisation drive. And I thought that was really interesting, giving us a bit of a tour of the internal machinations of the Reform UK party. And I think like a lot of these more right-wing parties, these more entrepreneurial new parties that are just getting formed across Europe and around the world, they suffer from a lot of egos and not a lot of discipline. To a lot of people in the mainstream, they might be thinking, Reform, they're the really right-wing party. But actually, when you zoom in, it seems that there are factions within it, and really quite serious ones, and it feels like there is a right wing of Reform and a centrist wing of Reform, and in the words of Nigel Farage this morning, there's no coming back for Rupert Lowe. Let's see what happens next. Thanks for tuning in. This was UnHerd.